company called Powered EMS. I say awesome because it's just a company I really love to work at. I also started up a meetup in Orlando. We're called the Downtown UX Meetup. And we're one of, as far as I'm aware, one of the larger communities of user experience designers and advocates that meet in Central Florida at the very least, if not in the larger Florida area. So today we're going to be talking about championing user experience at your organization and introducing it to a development process. So as I prepared for this talk, I actually realized there's sort of like 2 talks in here. So there's going to be a ton of information. I'm going to fly through a lot really fast. It might be a little bit of a fire hose, but don't worry, because I actually wrote 2 articles to go along with this talk that they should actually publish automatically on Medium in about 20 minutes or so. But I'll give you guys those articles as well. It'll have everything that's in my slides and all sorts of detailed information about it. So in case you miss a note, don't worry. It'll be there for you in the resources. So let's dive in. Let's dive in. You always got to have an awkward moment, right? Maybe I'll have it over with. Okay, so we'll start with championing UX. So I want you to think back to a time when someone told you how to do your job. It probably didn't feel very good. It probably wasn't a very fun experience. And I can actually think of a time when this happened to me. We had somebody in our organization who worked for weeks kind of by themselves, siloed off, designing and writing up a style guide. So a writing style guide for our organization. And they sent it out one day, and none of us kind of knew that it was coming, but they sent it out to us, and they said that everybody has to sign up on this policy about how you're allowed to communicate with our customers, and you're not allowed to violate it. Every time you send out an email, every time you talk to somebody, you have to follow this style guide. And there is a lot of valid reasons why it's important to have a common brand theme, common brand communication style. But the way they went about it, and really kind of their whole approach to the matter, was very commanding. It was very siloed. And what happened was, as a company, we all basically rejected it. So there was a lot of us that just plain off did not sign off on it. And a lot of us that, even if we did sign off on it, we just blew it off and we ignored it. And we felt bad, too. We felt like somebody was coming in and just dictating to us how we had to behave without allowing us to engage in that process. And so one of the things that's really interesting is that when we champion for user experience, especially, so a lot of this perspective is going to be coming into organizations. So you come into organizations, especially when they've been doing development for a while, and you're going to champion for user experience there and say, hey, let's add user experience to this development process. A lot of times it can feel like you're stepping in and you're saying, hey, you've been doing it wrong. And that's not at all the case. That's not at all what we're trying to say. We're trying to say, hey, we can add this in and it can make our lives easier. It can help us to reduce risk. It can help us to make better decisions and have more confidence in it. It's not that you were doing it wrong. There's probably really great reasons why, honestly, there is really great reasons why a lot of companies start just with a developer sitting in a room hacking together an app. That's totally an appropriate place to start. And it doesn't mean that you've been doing it wrong if you haven't been considering UX. It just means you can incorporate UX into that process and you can do a lot more. So let's kind of think about this, because when we come in and we try to champion for UX, we are trying to change. We're trying to change our organization. We're trying to change a culture. And change is really hard. If you talk, there are people that just speak just about change and how you approach change organizationally. So we have an advantage, though, as user experience designers. How many people here are user experience designers? How many people here are developers? Cool. I'm so glad that you're here. I started at my company as a developer, and I learned about user experience. And I said, this is something that we should be incorporating in our development life cycle. And I championed for it, and I got shot down hard, like tears hard. Like, it was bad. And I decided I love the company. I already told you, Powered EMS is an amazing company to work for. I love the company. I love the people I work with, and I care about the product that we make so much that I didn't want to give up. I didn't want to go somewhere else to do user experience, so I kept championing. And I learned a lot, and so you're going to learn a lot from my mistakes. But it took me 3 years to do this. It's so hard. So as user experience designers, let's think about how we design for change in a product. How do we approach that change? So one of the things that's really important is, especially if you build a product that's essential to somebody's lifestyle or essential to somebody's job, like if you're in the enterprise space and you're building an application that somebody uses for their job, it's really important you don't pull the rug out from under their feet. You don't disrupt them or release a new deployment of your product where it just totally disrupts your users. They log in and now, something they depend on to do their 9 to 5, they just have no idea where everything went. It's like, you don't want to come home and find somebody's moved all of the plates in this cabinet in your kitchen over to here and all of your cups underneath the sink. It would be so disruptive. And so when we introduce change to a product, a lot of times we try to do it incrementally. If we're being agile, it really forces us to try to be incremental anyways. And so we can think about strategy of kind of taking baby steps before we ask our customers to make that leap, to make it to the place where we want them to get it. We know we want them to get there, but we've got to take those baby steps so that they're going to get there in a way where they see the obvious value of making that leap, right? So let's take that mindset and let's use that mindset as we kind of think about how we can champion for user experience in our organization, not just for change of product. So there's a couple of really cool steps, and like I said, you guys are learning from all of the mistakes I made. So I'll talk about a couple of those total failures that I did. But the first thing that you need to do, step one, is you got to know the data. So if you're trying to have a conversation with somebody to advocate for user experience, to say, hey, this is something that we should do, you really got to know the data behind why. So I'm going to run through some of the most important data real quick, but like I said, I'm going to hook you guys with an article with a lot of links and more in-depth stuff that you can really dig into. So first up, we are in the age of the customer. So this is according to Forrester Research as of 2010. We're now in the age of the customer. And so sort of from the 1900s to today, we've gone through the age of manufacturing, the age of distribution, the age of information, and age of the customer. And each of the ages kind of builds on the ones before it. You think about, first you had a master of being able to mass produce things and manufacture, and then, now everybody can do that pretty well, but are people able to distribute those goods? So in each of these different ages, what Forrester has found is that the companies that are masters of these different techniques are able to significantly outperform all of their competition. So in all of these, as we kind of think about it, and honestly, actually the age of information, masters of age of information really like Google. Think about Google. We're getting equipped with all this information. That's totally set us up for now being in the age of the customer, because if you wanted to buy a treadmill, what would be the first thing that you would do? Probably get on the internet, start looking at reviews, start looking at product features, start seeing what people say about it. Did people give this a 5-star rating? Why not? Did it break on somebody after using it for 3 months? We have so much information at our fingertips that it creates this sort of problem for companies that it's no longer enough to just do something. It's no longer enough to just solve a problem. We have to solve a problem in a way that doesn't just get you from point A to point B, but a way that gets you from point A to point B with an amazing journey, with an effortless journey, with a delightful journey. And so that is why we're now in the age of the customers. Because everybody has so much information at their fingertips, anybody can build an app to do the same thing that your app does. Anybody can do it, they can be doing it sitting in their bedroom. But your app can significantly outperform them because the experience of your app is so much better, and people pay more for it because it's worth it. So that leads me to 2. UX can be a key product differentiator. I don't know if you can see colors here. There's gray and yellow. One of them's yellow. That's the one that's better. I don't know. So kind of exactly what I'm talking about. Anybody can build an app that can do something, that can accomplish some task. But people still pay for apps when there are free equivalent versions available. Why do they do that? Because those apps that they pay for have better experiences. They deliver a better value. Even if you line up the features and line by line with exact same features on paper, that doesn't mean it's the same experience. So we find these companies that are really paying attention to being, we are in the stage of the customer. As they design for the user experience, as they design for the customer experience, their products are having a really big differentiation from their competition. All right, data 3. UX has been proven to have a huge ROI. And when I say huge, I mean like ridiculously huge. And we've known this for so long. It's amazing. So 88, Tom Guild, he's the most quoted on this. In the article, you find a link to his book. It's great stuff. But basically back in 88, he did this research that found that every single dollar invested in user experience typically has a return of $10 to $100. Oftentimes leaning more towards the 100. Which is so big. Like that's if you're not investing in user experience, you're losing money if you think about it that way. In 2008, Nielsen Norman Group, I think this is the most recent time they've done this survey, but they've been keeping a pulse on user experience and how it affects KPIs. And in 2008, their survey found that on average, companies that invested 10% in user experience had an 83% growth in KPIs. So, you think about, if I give you a quarter and you give me 83%, we'll just say $1. You give me $1 back, that's great, right? I'm getting amazing return on my investment. So that is great data, and there's so much. Just Google UX ROI. You'll find infographics. You'll find all sorts of data. You'll find documentation and research from the government about how much UX has this huge ROI. And then finally, data 4. UX reduces the risk and the cost of failure. So you've probably seen this, and a lot of times this is even talked about when we think about testing for quality of code. So if we release a product and there's a bug that we found here, it costs us a lot more than if we found a bug back here. But then if we think about design, and we think about user experience defects or user experience debt, a lot of us know about technical debt, but user experience debt's a real thing. And it can cause friction and disruption for your users. It can cause your service desk to have to be handling way more phone calls and people calling in being like, I don't know how to use this thing. Or it can cause your development team to be spending months and months investing in a feature that users never click on or they never engage with. Even though you're creating value, that value isn't actually realized by your users because they don't even know it's there. So if we can invest in user experience early on, we can identify those friction points and identify those defects through our research, so that we don't get out to the release point and we find out, oh, nobody is using our feature because they're missing a button, right? We can find that out early on and we can change that design and we can release something that's actually going to deliver a ton of value. It's going to serve our customers really well. It's going to make our NPS score go up, right? It's going to make people really value our product and not switch to a competitor just because they've got the same feature set and cost less. So that's a lot of great data, right? I don't know, you feeling convinced? Yeah? No? No? I'm not surprised if you're not, because you can give all that data to your boss and they're probably going to be like, okay, what do you want me to do with this? It's great data. It's super great data, and it is sound research for sure. But, I mean, and this happened to me, you can present that data and you just get back a blank stare. Okay, well, so what? And the trouble here is that data isn't very relatable. It's really easy to dismiss it by being like, well, maybe they just have really great salespeople in that time. Maybe they just were doing something else. Maybe their customers did a big mess up and, whatever it is. And even if you can be like, no, look at all the data, look at all the research, your CEO doesn't want to look at that, and they don't care. So how can we make this data relatable? How can we tell a story with it so that we can champion for UX really well at our organization? And so if you have been at your organization for a while, you have an advantage here. If you haven't, you might need to do a little research. But what I would recommend doing is think back, and you might just do this right now. Think about a feature that you released months ago, a year ago, whatever, something that you put out in your product that in hindsight now you've learned confuses your users, or creates friction, or is problematic. Maybe people are calling in service desk trying to figure out, what the heck, how do I use this feature? I don't understand the security model. I'm so lost. I'm so confused. So think back to a feature that your development team spent months maybe building out. Now take that feature and go to these skeptics and let's talk about this feature and say if we knew back when we started development on this project what we know now about how people are not using it, are being confused about it, or whatever. If we knew that information back then, would we have done things differently? Would we have changed the design before we started development on it? Would we have maybe decided to not build it at all? Maybe we learn now that it's actually just not something that's valuable for our customers. And when you have that conversation with somebody, it's really interesting, and what you're really trying to do is give them an opportunity to arrive at the conclusion themselves without you pushing it on them. But the conclusion is, and you can help them along if they don't get there, but the conclusion is UX can, and particularly usability testing and doing design research, can help us to identify those things before we even start development, or during the early stages or the mid stages of development. We can identify these issues. And so in that way, user experience, and I didn't think about this until I created this presentation, but user experience in many ways is a little bit like a superpower. Like, we have the ability to look into the future and see, what are the designs that we're making that are going to totally fail, that are going to create a lot of friction for our customers. What are the design decisions that we're making now, the assumptions that we're making now that are just totally wrong? And so, hopefully, having that conversation with the skeptics, being able to make the idea of usability testing, the idea of user research, and user experience design relatable will help connect the dots to why this is valuable and the reason why people are getting such a huge return on their investment. So hopefully that'll help with that. So, cool, we're going to keep rolling. Step 3. Everybody doing okay? I know. Fire hose. All right, step 3 is teaching. So, when we first learned about user experience, everybody in this room has heard the term user experience. Some of us are really, really passionate, really believe in it, really love it. But how we got there is, maybe when we first heard about the term, we started immersing ourselves in articles. We started going to meetups. We started buying books about the topic. Maybe going to conferences like this. And so we started learning about user experience more and more, and we went on this journey, and we see the value, and we understand the tools, and we get how to apply it. But our coworkers haven't gone on that journey. Our boss didn't go on that journey. So let's think about how could we be a Sherpa to guide them so that they can maybe even just gaze up at the peak of UX, even if we don't get them all the way up there, right? The reason why this is so important, and a concept you've probably heard of, I think it was most popularized by IDEO, the CEO of IDEO, but the idea is T-shaped people. So, and I don't know why I like to call it skill set sombrero. I like going up instead of down. I think it's cute, whatever. People know T-shaped people. Skill set sombrero is my own thing, I made it up. If you Google it, you're not going to find anything. But yeah, so the idea is you have the breadth of knowledge in your domain. So for me, this depth of knowledge of user experience. But it's also really important for me to be able to work well with my colleagues to have a wide breadth of knowledge that's a lot shallower, where I know a little bit about front-end design, I know a little bit about back-end design, I know a little bit about marketing and sales, I know a little bit about what a phone call sounds like when a customer calls in. Those are all important things for me to be able to work really well, to collaborate really well with my coworkers, and to really have the full picture of how we as a company solve problems and work together. So the idea is if you can teach your coworkers, you can help them to become T-shaped people. And remember, it goes both ways. So you don't want to just be like, hey, back-end devs, you got to learn about this UX thing. It's really important for you to also learn about back-end development, because that's going to be helpful for you, honestly, when you're trying to design things, to really kind of understand some of the technical limitations of the technical platform that your product sits on. So a really great way to do this is lunch and learns. Everybody who here does lunch and learns? Yeah? That's awesome. If you don't do lunch and learns, they're a really great way to create a culture of learning at your company. Earlier we were talking about having a beginner's mindset, if you're in the talk this morning. Having that opportunity to have a culture of learning at your organization is so cool. And when you start doing this, you'll find other people want to teach you too. So be like, hey, come to lunch, and maybe sometimes if you elbow hard enough, you can get your company to provide lunch. That's always good. It's a helpful draw. Yeah, so you can have lunch, and I'm going to teach you about something and about user experience. And then next week, we're going to have lunch again, and we're going to have this community as a team. And somebody on the back is going to teach us about our data stack, or our data architecture, whatever it is. They're a great opportunity to learn that. So some of the lunch and learns that I would recommend you try now, and a little bit of why. So first, wireframing and prototyping. So as user experience designers, wireframing and prototyping is one of the most important skills that we have in order to quickly fail. It's really important, and I think one of the most important things about user experience design is that it's a field, it's a discipline where, yeah, we have to design, but just as important as designing is, we have to be really good about figuring out what we're wrong about as fast as possible. That is what brings us value as user experience designers, is figuring out what assumptions we made that are wrong, or what we've been wrong about as quickly as possible, because then we can start being right. So, no matter how, I think the term is genius design, in your talk earlier, but no matter how much of a genius you think you are, you're always going to be wrong about something. Your users will always surprise you. And if you've sat in a single usability session, a single usability test, you will learn that your users will always shock, sometimes like appall, and totally surprise you. And that's not because they're wrong. You know, you want to design something that's going to serve your customers. So anyways, wireframing and prototyping and teaching your colleagues about this is a great way to help illustrate how you can very easily learn about how you're wrong way in the design stage. So with that, right underneath there, I've got usability testing. That kind of goes hand to hand. So being able to do a usability test with your prototype and be able to learn from it. Personas are another really important thing that help to build empathy for your entire team. This is great for an entire team, not just for user experience designers. I am always surprised at how often it is that developers, sometimes actually not even sometimes, often designers and developers work on a product where they've never spoke to a customer. They've never seen somebody using it. They've never hung out or gotten lunch with somebody who has purchased their product. And that's a really difficult thing to do, because in many ways, you create a culture where you've got a bunch of people you're asking to build a boat, and those people have never seen that boat in water. They have no idea if it floats or not. They're just, you know, nailing down the boards, they're following that process, they're building that boat, and it's great, but they don't know all of the efficiencies, all of the friction points, all of the frustrations that people might have with that boat, or if that boat even sinks. Cool. Quantitative research with analytics. So that's a great lunch and learn topic, because oftentimes, especially if you have a web-based product, you depend, and you use like things like Google Analytics or other tools that are similar, you really depend on developers to implement events and tracking with quantitative research type stuff. And so it's important for them to understand why that's valuable and why that needs to be included in the development cycle. Because Google Analytics and other tools like it are only as valuable as you make them. And if you don't actually put in the effort to track events ahead of time and you have that foresight, then you know, in retrospect you can be like, well, we just don't have the data that we need in order to be able to make good decisions. Cool. User flow diagramming. So it can be especially tricky, particularly I think now with all of the single page apps out there in the world, to realize how complex completing a single task might be. They're still on the same page, they just click a couple of buttons, they went through something. But maybe they had to actually do 15 cognitive processes in their head, 15 decisions where, you know, it's a super complex process. And user flow diagrams can help us visualize that complexity and help us simplify it, maybe realize issues or realize ways that we could reduce the amount of decisions the user has to make to get from point A to point B. They're also a great way that you can communicate with your development team and document a lot of the interaction. And then finally, journey mapping and blueprint. Don't start here. There's actually a workshop, I think, on journey mapping maybe tomorrow. But yes, you don't start with this lunch and learn, but this is a great one that'll actually introduce your team to the concept of user experience beyond the product. Because that's so important, the customer experience, that entire ecosystem. If you only ever focus on your product, you're never going to have the ability to fully create the best experience for your users. Cool. Are you feeling good? All right. Championing step 4, showing. So back in the day, I say back in the day, a lot of designers would take some product requirements and then they would go run and do a hike up the design mountain. They would go convene with the design gods at the top of the mountain, and then they would come back down and be like, here's perfect design, implement it, don't move a pixel, right? You know, like, this is such a common thing, but that's a vestige of old design. That's not user experience design. User experience design doesn't thrive in that environment where you hold on to something, where a product's your baby. It's not about you, it's not about your ego, it's not about you being a great designer. Like I said, it's about figuring out what you're wrong about. Collectively, as a team of people, what assumptions you guys are making that are wrong, so you can start being right about them, because then you can build these amazing products, right? So, something that's really important, and it's not to say get up on a stage and be like, look at all of my user experience design, look at all these paper prototypes, they're great. You don't need to get up on a stage and do it, but just don't do it behind a curtain. A lot of times I would encourage letting it be a passive thing, so find a common space where people go and eat lunch. I've even heard stories of people doing this in like hallways where people walk through. Where you just, you know, maybe you're doing an ideation session, or maybe you're working on prototyping something. Get your paper, get your materials, start sketching. And as people walk by, if they have a few minutes, they might stop and look over your shoulder, and they might say, oh, what are you working on? and they might have some great ideas. If you think about it, every single person at your organization should be a subject matter expert on something. It might be your users, it might be your business model, it might be your technology stack, it might be your product. Whatever it is, everybody you work with is a subject matter expert on something, and you alone don't have the whole picture. So they can provide such valuable insight in these moments of spontaneous collaboration. And yes, they're not going to understand all the design constraints. They're not going to maybe understand all the requirements. They might make recommendations and immediately be like, oh, well, here's the 5 reasons why that wouldn't work. And you don't need to be like, oh, here's the 5 reasons why that wouldn't work, right? But you can take their insights, you can take their stuff, and that doesn't mean that anything somebody walks up and says, oh, what about this? It means you have to, oh, what about this? But you can find all those nuggets of information out of that collaboration and have a lot of value that you wouldn't have otherwise. Something else that's really valuable, and this has come up, I think, in both talks before this morning, but inviting people in to observe usability testing. So I've had instances where I've asked the developer, all right, I totally blew it with the design, and in testing I learned, people don't see the button that's over here, the information architecture will off, we gotta move the button over there. And the developer's like, oh, okay, maybe. I mean, I just finished it, really? And a lot of times it's like, oh man, I could have maybe done better research ahead of time. But like I said, nobody's a perfect designer. And there is nothing that helps that developer to gain empathy, to want to move that button, to actually care about what it's going to be like once it gets released, as inviting them and having them sit in and observe a user with it. A lot of times I will actually invite in, and I'll kind of expect any of the developers that are working on something that we're designing to be present in the usability sessions where we're testing it, as many as they're able to join. And I tell them, you just bring your laptop. You can sit there and you can code if you want to, but a lot of times they end up just paying attention because it's interesting, it's engaging, and they like to see how users interact with the things they're building. But at the end of those sessions, a lot of times the developer will then be like, oh man, Matt, we have to move that button. That guy was totally baffled. We didn't design it right. And they're happy to do it, and they totally see the value, and they totally understand it. It is so helpful. I really recommend doing it. You might get pushback. People might be like, oh, you're wasting my time. What? Oh, just bring your laptop. Just sit in the room. It's great. Okay. Oh, also, invite people into ideation sessions. Invite people in to workshops. Cross-functional teams are able to think about problems in a much broader scope than a room full of designers. That's lots to say about that. Okay. Step 5. Building a team of champions. So you can't change organizational culture on your own. It doesn't even matter if your company is 5 people. You can't change organizational culture on your own. It just doesn't happen. It's not possible. I don't care if you're the CEO and you're pushing really hard. You're just going to be pushing really hard, and the organization will just push back. Or if you're the most genius designer, it just isn't going to be possible. So what's going to happen is as you are advocating and championing the user experience in your organization, you will notice people that totally agree with you. They totally see it. They totally get it. They totally believe in it. And those are the people that you want to call out and be like, hey, let's champion for this together. Because you can accomplish so much more when you have many people moving in a direction than when you're trying to run there by yourself. So it doesn't matter if they're designers even. It doesn't matter if they're user experience designers. It doesn't matter if they're designers at all. They might be your VP of sales. It might be somebody on the support desk. It might be somebody in finance. It doesn't matter who they are. As long as they are able to see the value of user experience and they understand it and they can advocate for it, they will help you and you're championing user experience in your organization. And then when, no matter how flat or whatever your company is, there's always bubbles, there's always silos, there's always segregation. If you can get somebody in every single bubble to start championing for user experience, now all of the skeptics are not just going to feel pressure from you inside their bubble, but they're also going to feel pressure from the company, from all of the bubbles. So that's going to be a really helpful thing in championing. So it's really important. All right. So is your organization now a UX Mecca? Probably not. I mean, like I said, it took me 3 years championing at Power DMS before we really decided to change and introduce user experience and actually make our development process a design-led process. which is kind of weird to say, but like maybe an experience-led process is a better way to say it. But like I said, it does take time to be persistent. And I'm going to continue to be persistent to champion for human-centered design and my entire organization. Like I said, I'm not there yet, but human-centered design practice and a lot of the ideas behind user experience can really be applied not just to your product, but your entire customer experience. Not just to your entire customer experience, but also to the processes your different departments use as well. Like, you know, you can apply human-centered design to your sales process. It's an internal tool. It's an internal way of working, but you can still apply it and you can make it better and you can have it where it serves your employees better and it serves your customers better. So, that's championing. And I have one final thought on it, and here's just a word to a wise. You're not going to get anywhere hating on your product. So there may be things in your product that are objectively bad user experience. There are things in the product that I work on that are objectively bad user experience. It happens. We all have stuff like that. We all have that baggage. But going around and bashing on it, going around and hating on it, what you end up doing is the people that you're talking to, or the people around you, all you're doing is pushing them up on the ropes. And even if they agree with you, they don't have much of an option other than to come back swinging. So instead of hating on the bad experience that lives there today, instead cast a vision and champion for the experience that could be there in the future. And lead that charge, and that way, instead of pushing somebody against the ropes, you're going to be inviting them to run a marathon with you. And like, yes, marathons are long, and marathons are hard, but if you guys can run it together, I'm sure you can finish. Awesome. That's part one. How are we doing? Well, all right, I am 30 minutes in, so we're going to fly through part two. Introducing user experience and development process. Who here is working in Scrum? Yeah. Cool. A lot of people. This is my attempt at drawing a person shoving a box that has a UX label on it into a sprint. I don't know if that translated without the explanation, but hopefully it did. I'm glad. I appreciate the chuckles. So in the beginning, there was a waterfall. It was okay. I mean, people were able to produce some things with it, right? But it's a very stepped process, and oftentimes it's characterized by like, well, you know, you get some things, you just trust it as fact, you do some work, and you throw it over the wall, and you never think about it again, and maybe it gets out to a customer eventually, who knows? And then there was Agile. So Agile came in, and it wasn't that Agile hated anything. It wasn't that Agile was like, oh, these things suck, don't do them. It was that Agile was saying, these are the things that we're going to value. So these things include individuals and interactions. We're valuing over processes and tools. Doesn't make processes and tools bad. Individuals and interactions are just more important for us. Working software, customer collaboration, responding to change. These are all really great principles. And if we think about user experience design, that fits well with user experience design, right? Customer collaboration. Oh my gosh, yes, let's do it. But what ended up happening was Agile kind of came out, the Agile Manifesto. That is the whole thing. There's a website that has that on it. There's a link to it in the article. But Agile came out, and actually what ended up happening is Scrum became the most popular one, as far as I'm aware. And a lot of people kind of think about Agile, they're actually just thinking about Scrum. Scrum's a process, right? It's great. And Scrum's a process that I think the last statistic I saw was like some 80% of development teams are now using it, which is cool. It's really cool that they got on to this and they're kind of following this Agile process. But a lot of times when you think about Scrum, you just think about Scrum. You think about the sprint, you think about the stand-up, you think about that process, and you lose sight of the whole point of it. You lose sight of kind of the values that help to create a process that would try to stick to those values. And you get a lot of weird things. So Scrum, Kanban, Lean, and Extreme Programming are some of the most popular different Agile development or product development processes. So we're going to talk about all of them except for Extreme Programming. Does anybody do Extreme Programming? I'm so glad. I have no idea. I tried to learn about Extreme Programming. I just, like, I see an AT&T logo. I'm not sure. But I didn't have time to figure out I'm going to talk about all the things that I've experienced with, which is Scrum, Kanban, and Lean. And we'll figure out Extreme Programming another day. So what you're probably doing if your development team decided to jump on a Scrum, which was a lot of what I saw happening, is you have these Agiles becoming more popular, Scrum is exploding in the development world, and your development team's like, hey, we're going to do Scrum because it's going to be a better way to develop software, right? So your development team jumps on Scrum, but they didn't really think about design. And so they leave design in this waterfall, and they start being agile on just one of the steps of the waterfall. And that's okay. You know, we're kind of figuring things out, making progress. But a lot of times, and this is where I honestly started with this, when I was doing design in a Scrum, this is where I started. It's not a bad place to start. There's a lot of cons. Some of the biggest cons are, by the time somebody starts working on something you designed, you're already on to 3 other things. And you can often forget about a lot of the design decisions that you made. You have to document everything really, really well. And then you document things so well and so complex, maybe you deliver a 40-page document, and then the developer is like, 40 pages, I'm not reading this. Like, are you kidding me? And so there's a lot of problems that come on with trying to design, and honestly, we're not integrated either. We don't have any benefits that we get from collaboration. So this one might not be the best for us. So Scrum with just-in-time design. So what we do with just-in-time design is we take a user experience designer and we throw them into the dev team. They're now in the sprint. Cool, we're integrated, we're collaborating. So good so far. But we start a sprint, we get this list of backlog items, and some of the backlog items have to not have design because there's only so much user experience designers, and we can't have the whole development team waiting on us for the entire sprint. So some of the things cannot have design, and a lot of times it's just, well, we have some things that we're not designing, whatever, don't want to take it. You can have some things that might help with this, like a style guide that your developers, with some things that just aren't complex and that can help with that. But what ends up happening is that you also have to design and then write code within the same sprint, which is typically a 2 to 3 period. And so your development team can maybe get a little bit resentful of you if you're trying to do research and trying to take time with the design or trying to actually validate and test your assumptions. It also is extremely hard to set up your research times or find the proper research candidates to test with within that sort of cadence. And a lot of times you're going from one sprint to the next, so you don't really have time to be like, hey, what's in the next sprint so I can set that research up now. So there's just a lot of things, and it really forces you as a designer to not consider the holistic view, to not really have time to think about the big picture, but really just be present and just try to get work done. Getting work done isn't bad, but I think we can do better. So let's keep thinking. So there's this idea in Scrum called spikes. You guys who follow Scrum are probably familiar with spikes. And a spike is typically, because Scrum is so development focused, typically a spike would be your architect is like, hey, we need to really focus a lot of time on this technical thing to figure out how we can actually implement it. So that's typically where spikes come from, but we can do design spikes, right? So again, we still have to have the whole development team being able to work on tasks or work on dev or work on other things that don't require us doing design. And then we step out of the picture for a week and we go and we do some high-level stuff. Maybe we think about the big picture. Maybe we figure out some things that are going to kind of pave the road for us as we go into the future. And then we come back after the week. Hopefully we finish. If not, we'll try maybe spiking again, seeing if we can get the team to agree to that. And we'll keep doing that until we're able to get to the place that we need to be. So again, there's, this does solve a couple of our problems, but there's also some big problems that it brings up. So we're now segregating the teams again. We're losing our collaboration with the developers. We're often very much slowing down momentum, and we're holding people back from being able to get work done. So I'm still not satisfied with this. Let's keep going. So staggered sprints, sprint pairs, sprint zero, sprint or fall. I've heard this a lot of different ways, and the idea behind this is actually really appealing. So we're like, oh, all right, we've got a group of people doing this type of work, a group of people doing that type of work. Let's just have them each do their own sprint, and the design sprint will be the input for the next development sprint. So that's oftentimes where sprint zero is like, design starts, and then they're like, okay, development, do all this stuff, and we'll start working on the next stuff you're going to do. And then once development does stuff, it kind of comes back in, and design's supposed to kind of review and check it. But there are, again, a lot of problems that happen with this. First off, we're actually stepping closer back towards waterfall. We're, again, losing collaboration. We're, again, when a problem does come up, the dev's like, hey, you didn't consider these technical constraints in your design. We're in the middle of trying to design something totally different. We're not really working together. So again, there's some other problems with that. Let's keep going. Kanban. Anybody here use Kanban? Kanban's fun. I love Kanban. So Kanban, the idea of Kanban, if you're not familiar, is you've got these cards. Each card's a feature or unit of work or whatever. You try to get your cards down as small as possible. But your cards kind of flow from left to right, and each column is a different stage in the process. So you've got your backlog as a column, and then you've got design, development, and QA, and Launchpad, or whatever. So we're going to call one of those columns UX, and we'll be pulling things in, and not everything needs UX work, so those things we'll just kind of let pass by. The things that do need UX work, we'll get on it, we'll plan our research, we'll do our work, we'll create prototypes, we'll be really fast with it, and then we'll get it to a place where we're happy with it and we'll mark it as done. And then development, we'll pull from our column into starting to work on stuff. So what's cool about this is it's a lot closer to when somebody starts working on something that you just finished designing. That solves a lot of problems. You're still on one team, like you're on one board. You are a team together. So even though you're sort of segregated into your column for the work that you do, there is still some collaboration that happens there, and there still is opportunities. And even when things go into development, you still often will work with developers in a Kanban environment. So, so this is actually pretty cool, and it does solve a lot of problems for us. But there are a few cons with it. And so this is the one out of all of the kind of more traditional methods that I've found most success in. But I want to talk to you guys about Lean as well, which is another thing that came up. Anybody here familiar with Lean? Got a couple, yeah. It's cool. So Lean is it's taken from manufacturing, and it's this idea of we're gonna learn, we're gonna build, we're gonna measure. And we're just keep doing that over and over and over again. And we'll focus around a problem, and once we've solved that problem, we'll focus on the next problem. And that's sort of how we kind of work in Lean. And so Jeff Gothelf actually wrote an amazing article that I linked to in the materials. It's almost like journal. Like it's a journal of him while he was working at the Ladders back in 2010, I think, trying to figure out how to do UX with Agile. And he goes through a lot of the things that we actually talked about, not all of them, but he goes through a lot of the things and he finds a lot of these same problems. And where he got to is actually creating sort of his own thing, which he has since released a book called Lean UX. It's a super great book. I highly recommend it. Even if you don't want to buy the book, you can learn about it on the internet. It's great. But essentially what we're doing is instead of having a bunch of people that do a bunch of different things, we're saying we want our team to work together. We want them to focus on a problem. And we're just going to empower them to solve that problem, because we know we've got a cross-functional team here. We've got everybody that's necessary to solve that problem. So we're going to just give them that problem and we're going to say, all right, solve it. And that team together will define that problem, make sure they really understand it. They'll collaborate with their stakeholders to make sure that kind of all of the details of the problem are clear. And then they'll start to create assumptions. They'll, to solve this problem, we're going to need to do these things. And from those assumptions, they'll formulate hypotheses. They'll say, we believe we need to implement this feature to do this thing. And we'll know that we were right about that when X happens. And so some sort of KPI or some sort of way that you can measure the things that you implement are actually right or wrong. So it's a really cool way that you can go about getting a team together and actually solving a problem, because it focuses much more on outcomes. What's the thing that's going to be the end result? Not just, we need to ship code and move on to something else. So it's a really great development process, and I really believe in it. But even today, this is the process that we follow at Power BMS. We still face a lot of issues with it. So some of the issues is if you're not dedicated to your team, it can be really challenging. So me, for example, I've been on feature teams where I've had other duties kind of off to the side, and not being able to invest 100% of my time with the feature team can really slow the feature team down, honestly. So if you have people where you have to manage a bunch of different features and a bunch of different problems all at once, this is going to be a really hard thing to do. It's also really, it can be really challenging, and again, you get that same problem of being like, oh man, this is my job. Like, why do I have to come to the usability session? Why do I have to have meetings with stakeholders? I just want to develop, right? So you can have a lot of pushback from developers, and a lot of times it can even be like, especially in the beginning, like, we're going so slow. Like, I feel like I'm just not coding enough. I feel like I'm not doing enough. And so it can feel like a slower process, but what we found is we actually are able to reach an outcome much more quickly than if we just started throwing in some code, just starting kind of following a Scrum process. Because a lot of times we'll just get something out and we'll move on, and we didn't actually reach our KPI. We didn't actually reach the objective why we built that thing in the first place, because we didn't take the time to actually evaluate if what we did really solved the problem. So I really love Lean UX. I believe in it. It might work really great for you. It might not. Maybe Kanban will be better. Maybe just in time with Scrum will be better. I'm not sure. It all kind of depends. So are you working on a UX team, or are you a fact one? So for the most part, I'm a Wolfpack of one. We've got a couple of other user experience designers, but they're really focused in other areas of the organization. So that's probably one of the biggest problems that we've had with Lean is just a lot of times I get pulled off on other things. If you have just a development team that's small enough where you're only going to have a single feature team, then Lean might work out really well. Are your coworkers more solitary or are they fiercely collaborative? You guys know from hearing me talk, I'm all about fierce collaboration. But sometimes if you have an environment that you work in where you really have solitary coworkers, a Lean process or a just-in-time process might not work as well for you. So there's all things to think about, and everything, I would like to say take everything with a grain of salt. You know, just because something works for one person doesn't mean it's going to work for you. So, you know, take all the information that you learn at this whole conference and really think about it and how can you apply it to the particular situation that you're in for you and your organization and your customers to be served best. Cool. So, UX and Dev Administrator. I don't know what they're doing. Now what? So, remember at the beginning of my talk, I spoke about not pulling the rug out from under your users. So if you do get into, inject your design process into an agile process with your team, if you do get integrated, if you do find that place where you're able to collaborate with them, you're going to be able to accomplish a lot more. You might even be like, all right, let's redesign the application. Cool, you know. But I want you to remember this because this is a really great lesson that we learned. And we were actually able to entirely redesign our application. And we did it in such a way, in such an iterative way, that for our customer base, which is very resistant to change, very late adopters, I mean, our primary users are law enforcement officers sitting in a cruiser. Like, they don't want their world being changed when they have to use this product to do their job every day. And so we were able to actually go about that in a way where we didn't, we actually didn't have barely any people that complained to us. And we changed little tiny things in the application and we get huge amounts of phone calls. So we were able to really learn about how to introduce change to our application in an iterative way in order to make it not feel different. We made the, you know, now your cabinets are roomier and they're bigger and they can hold more plates, but your plates are still in the same place, right? So we try to be very cautious about how we design for change. And I like to say a little bit of a mantra: make sure you aim before you fire the big guns. You see this all the time with companies where it's just like, you use a product and then you log in the next day and without notice. And actually this happened to me with Salesforce, which I think you worked on. Where I logged in the winter 16, so I was trying to log into the sandbox, and it was a coworker asked me to help them with something like 30 minutes before they had a presentation. I was like, all right, I know what I need to do. I just log in and make a change for them in their site. And so I logged in, and somebody was experimenting with the Winter 16 interface, and everything was totally different. I was just like, oh my gosh, I just need to do a job right now. I don't, like, yes, it's beautiful and it's great, and in any other situation now, we're going to all about like learning the new interface and experimenting with it and being excited about it as a user experience designer, seeing what they did. But in that moment, I was just like furious, like, oh, I need to do something for somebody right now. I don't have time for this. So make sure that when you're introducing change, that you do introduce it in a way where your customers aren't going to be disrupted. They're not going to have the rug pulled out from under them. And remember, your disruptive changes have to be obviously better. You can disrupt your customers, but if you do it in a way where they want that disruption, you've guided them down a road where they have the same vision that you have had for maybe months longer, but you've painted that picture for them and they see it and they understand. They're like, oh yes, I want to jump across that creek. Yeah. So that's my last word to you. Thank you guys so much for listening. I know it was a ton of information. Yeah, sorry. I don't know how to stop talking. Thank you. So while I was speaking, the articles should have gotten published on Medium. You can find that by going to medium.com/MattPLavoie. Like I said, there's 2 articles. They're each about like a 10-minute read, but there's a ton of resources and a ton of information there, and every single picture that you can choose and more are in there. So feel free to check those out. Fun fact, this presentation was about 45,000 pixels long. Yeah. I'd also love to talk with you. I'm going to be hanging out at Mentor Time later today and tomorrow. But also feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. email. If you're ever in Orlando, I'd love it if you came to the UX meetup that we run, Downtown UX. And yeah, have a great afternoon, and I hope you learned a lot today.